King Charles just did something that nobody saw coming, and I do not mean nobody in the sense of a missing guest list or a last-minute schedule change. I mean nobody. No leaked briefing the night before, no royal correspondent casually mentioning it on morning television, no carefully placed story in the Sunday papers to soften the ground, nothing. One moment Camilla is wearing a crown, the next moment she is not, and the woman standing beside Charles when it was all over was not his wife. It was Catherine. If that sounds like the plot of a prestige drama, you are not wrong, but it actually happened, and the details of how it went down are even stranger than the headline suggests. To understand why this hit the way it did, you have to go back to 2005 because this is not the first time the palace has tried to manage the question of Camilla's title. When she married Charles, the announcement was that she would be known as Princess Consort, not Queen Consort. That was deliberate. The public was still furious about Diana, still raw about the affair, still deeply uncomfortable with the idea of Camilla ever wearing a crown. The polls were unambiguous. Large majorities did not want her to become queen. So the palace blinked. They invented a title that had never existed before in British royal history, specifically to avoid the backlash. Princess Consort. It was a compromise designed to get them through the wedding without a public relations disaster. Then quietly over the years that compromise dissolved. By 2022, Queen Elizabeth herself said it was her sincere wish that Camilla be known as Queen Consort. That carried enormous weight. Elizabeth was not someone who made casual statements about the future of the monarchy. When she said something like that, it was meant to settle the question, and for a while it did. Camilla was crowned alongside Charles in May 2023. She wore Queen Mary's coronation crown modified for the occasion. She sat beside her husband in front of 2,000 guests and a global audience of hundreds of millions. On paper, the question was closed, but paper and reality inside the British royal family are rarely the same thing. The resistance never fully disappeared. It just went quiet. Certain factions inside the palace accepted Camilla's elevation publicly while remaining privately unconvinced. Senior courtiers who had served Elizabeth for decades, who remembered exactly how that marriage had unfolded, who had watched Diana navigate a situation that was never fair to her, smiled at the coronation and said nothing. Members of the extended family did the same. And then there was William. He has never made a public statement against Camilla. He attended the wedding in 2005. He interacts with her at official events with complete civility. Outwardly, he has done everything correctly. But the people around him tell a different story. William's view of Camilla has always been shaped by what he witnessed as a child. The affair that ran parallel to his parents' marriage, his mother's public pain, the years of watching Diana try to hold herself together while the institution closed ranks around her. He accepted Camilla because he had to, because his father loved her, because the institution required it. But he never forgot why that acceptance was necessary in the first place. That tension sat beneath the surface for years. And then Charles got sick. The cancer diagnosis in February 2024 changed the internal dynamics of the palace faster than anyone publicly acknowledged. Suddenly, the question of the next reign was not abstract. It was immediate. Planning that had been theoretical became operational, and in that shift, Camilla's position began to feel less settled than the coronation had suggested. Because here is the constitutional reality that most people outside the palace walls do not think about. Camilla's title, her role, her access to royal residences, her place in the formal structure of the monarchy, all of it exists because Charles is king. The moment Charles is no longer king, none of it transfers automatically. She does not become Queen Mother in the way Elizabeth did after George VI died. That was a unique situation, a title created specifically for Elizabeth because of her extraordinary circumstances and extraordinary public standing. Camilla's path forward after Charles is murkier, more dependent on goodwill, more subject to the preferences of whoever sits on the throne next, and William sits on the throne. So when Charles started canceling public engagements in January 2026, 3 consecutive weeks with no explanation beyond a vague statement about rest and ongoing medical management, the people inside the palace understood what was happening. His medical team had been adjusting his treatment schedule since late 2025. Sources close to the palace described the adjustments as significant, not routine. Something more serious was being managed behind those walls. The public saw a king who looked thinner, whose handshake had begun to look effortful in photographs. The people inside the palace saw a man preparing. Charles has known since his diagnosis that his reign would likely be shorter than anyone officially acknowledges. He became king at 73, the oldest person ever to ascend the British throne. He had waited longer than any heir in history, and then his body started sending signals he could not ignore. He has spoken privately, according to sources, about legacy, about what he wants the monarchy to look like when he is gone, about the transition he wants to manage rather than simply leave to chance. That thinking accelerated sharply in late 2025. William's role inside the palace had already shifted well before that point. By mid-2025, he was attending briefings that would previously have gone to Charles alone. Meetings with senior government officials, conversations with palace legal teams about estate management and succession planning, decisions about royal warrants, public appointments, institutional direction. That is not what a Prince of Wales traditionally does. That is what a king does. Charles was not abdicating. He was delegating, deliberately and systematically transferring authority to his son, while he still had the clarity and energy to shape how that transfer happened. The distinction matters. An abdication is a break. What Charles was engineering was a handover, careful, controlled, designed to give William every possible advantage when the moment of full succession arrived. But handovers have consequences, and one of the consequences nobody discussed publicly was what this acceleration meant for Camilla. Her position had always been tied to Charles's active reign. While he was fully king, fully present, fully in command, she was queen consort, protected by his authority, insulated by his presence. Whatever tensions existed between her and William remained manageable because Charles was there to absorb them. As Charles's active role began to contract, that insulation thinned. William's influence expanded into spaces Camilla had previously considered settled. Decisions about royal households, staffing arrangements, which engagements carried the palace's formal backing and which did not. She began to feel it. Sources describe a period in late 2025 where Camilla was increasingly frustrated by what she perceived as being consulted less and overruled more. Not dramatically, not in ways that generated specific incidents, just a gradual, consistent narrowing of her influence within the institution she had spent 20 years becoming part of. She raised it with Charles. He listened. He was sympathetic. He also, by multiple accounts, told her plainly that William needed room to prepare and that certain adjustments were necessary and correct. That conversation did not resolve the tension. It clarified it. Meanwhile, Catherine's visibility was rising in ways that made everything sharper. Her return from cancer treatment in 2024 had been handled with remarkable skill. She controlled the timing of her reappearance. She chose the moments carefully. She came back not as someone diminished by illness, but as someone the public had missed acutely and welcomed back with a warmth that surprised even seasoned royal watchers. The affection was genuine, and it was enormous. Inside the palace, that affection translated directly into institutional currency. Catherine had always been popular. After her illness, she became something more than popular. She became the figure the public was most emotionally invested in, the one people were rooting for. That kind of public standing gives you leverage inside an institution that ultimately depends on public goodwill to survive. Camilla understood this. She had navigated public opinion for long enough to know exactly what Catherine's standing meant. It meant the future had a face, and that face was not hers. So by early 2026, all the pieces were in place. Charles had the motivation, his health, his legacy, his desire to set the next reign up correctly. William had the authority accumulated quietly over 18 months of managed transition. Catherine had the public standing built over years and cemented by how she handled the hardest period of her life. And Camilla had run out of the one thing that had always protected her: time. The ceremony that followed was not spontaneous. It was not an emotional decision made in the heat of a difficult moment. It was the result of everything that had been moving inside that palace for the past 2 years finally arriving at a single visible public point: a crown removed, a crown placed, and a monarchy telling the world in the clearest possible language which direction it was facing. Here is where the timeline gets genuinely strange. It was a Tuesday morning in March 2026. The announcement came through official palace channels at 9:15 in the morning. A formal ceremonial event would take place that afternoon at Windsor Castle. Senior members of the royal family would be in attendance. The public was invited to gather outside the gates. That was all the statement said. No further detail, no indication of what the ceremony involved. No advanced briefing to royal correspondents who would normally receive at least a broad outline of what they were about to cover. The press scrambled. Editors pulled journalists from other assignments. Camera crews that had been covering routine stories across London were redirected to Windsor within the hour. Nobody knew what was coming, and the palace, uncharacteristically, was not helping anyone find out. That is not how these things usually work. Usually there is a carefully managed drip of information, a few trusted correspondents given enough detail to frame the story correctly before it breaks. This time, nothing. Which means the palace knew that if the details leaked in advance, the backlash would have time to build before the ceremony even happened. They did not want a debate. They wanted a fait accompli. Inside Windsor, the state apartments had been prepared since early morning. Staff described the setup as formal but not extravagant, the kind of arrangement that signals significance without theatrical excess. Flowers but not elaborate installations. Seating for a controlled number of guests. The specific lighting configuration used for ceremonial occasions rather than routine royal gatherings. The guest list was small and deliberately chosen. Senior working royals, key palace officials, a small number of representatives from the College of Arms, the Archbishop of Canterbury, 2 senior members of the Privy Council, no extended family, no diplomatic guests, no celebrities or public figures included for optics. This was not a performance for a broad audience. It was a witnessed event. There is a difference. Performances are designed to be seen widely and interpreted broadly. Witnessed events are designed to be documented formally with the right people in the room so that what happens inside them carries constitutional and ceremonial weight. The palace wanted witnesses, not spectators. Charles entered the room at 2:45 in the afternoon. He walked without assistance, which several people in the room noted privately. His health had been the subject of sustained speculation for months. Seeing him walk unaided, upright, with deliberate pace visibly steadied the atmosphere. He was in full ceremonial dress, the kind of formal presentation the palace reserves for moments it intends to be remembered. Camilla entered beside him. She wore a deep navy dress, composed as she almost always is in public. Her expression was described by those present as unreadable, not distressed, not visibly emotional, simply present in the way that people are present when they have known something was coming and have spent considerable private time preparing for it. William and Catherine entered separately a few moments later and took their positions to the left of the central dais. The room settled. The Archbishop of Canterbury spoke first. The remarks were brief, deliberately so. He acknowledged the significance of what was about to occur, framed it in the context of the monarchy's continuity and its responsibility to the future, and then stepped back. Charles spoke next. His remarks lasted approximately 4 minutes. He spoke about duty, about the weight of the crown and what it asks of the people who carry it, about the difference between wearing something and being ready to carry what it represents. He did not mention Camilla by name. He did not mention William or Catherine by name either. He spoke in the abstract, in the careful language of constitutional monarchy, where the institution is always larger than the individuals inside it. But everyone in the room understood exactly what the words meant. What happened next took less than 3 minutes. Camilla stepped forward to stand before Charles. She was calm. Her hands, visible at her sides, were still. Charles reached forward and removed the crown she was wearing. Not Queen Mary's coronation crown, a smaller ceremonial crown used for formal occasions of this nature, one that carried the symbolic weight of her queen consort status without the full apparatus of the coronation regalia. He held it for a moment. The room was completely silent. Then Catherine stepped forward. She moved without hesitation. No visible nerves, no pause before taking her position. She stood before Charles with the same composed steadiness she has brought to every public moment since her return from illness. Charles placed the crown on her head. The room remained silent for several seconds after that, the kind of silence that is not empty but full, people processing what they had just witnessed, understanding that the image in front of them, Charles, Catherine, the crown now resting on a different head, was going to travel around the world within minutes and would be discussed for years. Then the Archbishop said a single formal phrase of acknowledgement. Protocol required it. It certified what had occurred for the official record, and that was it. 3 minutes, possibly less. The British monarchy had just told the world something it had never said quite so plainly before. The photographs released by the palace within the hour were chosen with precision. Three official images. The first showed Charles and Camilla at the beginning of the ceremony standing together, formal, composed. The image of a working monarchy conducting its business. The second showed the moment of transfer, Charles's hands visible, the crown between them, Camilla and Catherine both in frame. That is the photograph that every outlet used as its primary image, the one that made the front pages. The third showed Charles and Catherine after the placement, the crown on her head, his hand briefly resting on her shoulder, William standing slightly behind, his expression serious and still. Camilla was not in the third photograph. That was not an accident. Palace photographers do not make accidental choices at moments like this. The sequencing of those three images told the story as clearly as any written statement. Beginning, transition, arrival. The old order, the moment of change, and the new reality. Outside Windsor, the crowd had grown to several thousand by the time the images dropped. The reaction was immediate and complicated. Some people cheered genuinely, spontaneously in the way crowds cheer when something they have been waiting for, without knowing they were waiting for it, finally arrives. Catherine is enormously popular, and seeing her elevated formally and visibly landed for many people as something that simply felt right. Others were quieter, more reflective. Some who had followed the royal family for decades, who had watched Camilla's long, difficult journey to acceptance, felt the discomfort of watching that journey end in this particular way, in public, without the dignity of a private transition. A smaller number were openly critical. Social media filled quickly with arguments about whether this was appropriate, whether Camilla deserved better, whether the spectacle of a public removal was necessary or simply cruel. The palace had anticipated the mixed reaction. It always does. These decisions are not made without modeling the public response carefully in advance. What the palace had calculated correctly, as it turned out, was that the overall response would be net positive, that Catherine's standing with the public was strong enough to absorb the controversy that the manner of the transition generated. The numbers bore that out. Within 24 hours, polling indicated that a clear majority of British adults supported the change. A smaller but still significant majority said they approved of how it had been handled. The palace read the room correctly, but polls do not capture everything. They do not capture what happened inside Windsor Castle after the official ceremony ended and the guests moved through to a private reception. They do not capture the specific nature of the conversation between Charles and Camilla that evening, which sources describe as long and difficult, even by the standards of two people who have navigated long and difficult conversations for decades. They do not capture what William said to Catherine in private when the public day was finally over, and they do not capture the look on Camilla's face in the moment between the crown being lifted from her head and Catherine stepping forward to receive it. One person present described it simply. She looked like someone who had always known this was coming and had decided long before the day arrived that she was not going to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing it break her. Whether she succeeded in that is a question only she can answer. She did not cry. That was the first thing people in the room noticed. Not during the ceremony, not in the reception that followed, not in any moment that anyone present has been willing to describe on the record. Camilla has spent 30 years being underestimated by people who confused her composure for weakness. She did not give them a different impression on this day. She moved through the post-ceremony reception with the practiced ease of someone who has attended thousands of formal royal events and knows how to be present in a room without revealing anything she does not intend to reveal. She spoke to guests. She accepted condolences from some and congratulations from others because the room contained both, and she navigated that without visible difficulty. She left Windsor at 6:45 in the evening. No statement, no palace spokesman briefed on her behalf, nothing. The silence was strategic. Camilla has always understood that in the royal family, what you do not say is often more powerful than what you do. She watched Diana give interviews that generated enormous public sympathy and enormous institutional damage simultaneously. She watched Harry and Meghan speak openly about their grievances and lose almost everything they had hoped to gain. She drew her own conclusions from both examples. Speaking publicly about the ceremony would require her to either defend it or criticize it. Defending it would look like submission. Criticizing it would open a conflict she could not win. Silence was the only position that preserved any dignity and any leverage simultaneously, so she said nothing. And in saying nothing, she said everything people needed to understand about how she was processing this. Privately, it was a different story. Sources close to Camilla described the days following the ceremony as genuinely difficult, not because she was surprised by what happened. She had known this was coming, but conversations with Charles over the preceding months had been honest, if painful, and she had not been blindsided by the decision itself. What she had not fully prepared for was the public nature of it. Charles had presented the ceremony to her as a formal constitutional necessity, a clean, documented transfer of symbolic authority that needed to happen while he was still well enough to conduct it properly. He framed it as an act of responsibility toward the institution rather than a statement about her. She accepted that framing. She had to. But standing in that room, feeling the crown lifted from her head in front of witnesses, watching it placed on Catherine's head while the photographers documented every second, that was harder than the private conversations had prepared her for. One source described her in the days afterward as composed in public and exhausted in private, someone running on discipline because discipline is what she has always run on when everything else gets complicated. Her relationship with Charles in the aftermath has been described as strained but not broken. That distinction matters. These are two people who survived decades of public hostility together, who waited longer than almost any couple in modern royal history for their relationship to be accepted, who built something real and durable through circumstances that would have ended most partnerships long before the wedding. One ceremony, however public and however painful, does not undo that, but it changes it necessarily and permanently. Camilla's role going forward is something neither of them has fully defined yet. She retains her title for the duration of Charles's reign. She continues her charitable work, her public engagements, the causes she has championed for years, domestic violence awareness, literacy, the organizations she has built genuine relationships with over 2 decades of consistent attention. None of that disappears, but the crown is gone, and with it a layer of formal authority that cannot be recovered. Her family's reaction has been less contained than her own. Sources indicate that those closest to Camilla, her children Tom and Laura from her first marriage, her sister Annabelle, the small inner circle she has maintained throughout her royal life, were significantly more vocal and private about their feelings than she allowed herself to be. The word used by one source was furious, not at Charles specifically. The understanding within that circle is that Charles did what he believed was necessary for the institution and that his health gave the decision an urgency that overrode other considerations. The fury was directed more broadly at the process, at the public nature of it, at the sense that a woman who had endured as much public criticism as Camilla had over 30 years deserved a more private and more dignified transition than the one she received. That feeling is legitimate. It is also, in the cold logic of royal decision-making, largely irrelevant. The palace did not design this ceremony around what Camilla's family considered appropriate. It designed it around what the institution needed. Those two things did not align and the institution won. It almost always does. There is one moment from the reception that multiple sources have referenced independently. At some point in the evening, Camilla and Catherine were in the same small group of guests for approximately 10 minutes. They were civil, polite, the kind of interaction that two experienced royal women can conduct flawlessly, regardless of what is happening beneath the surface. But at one point, Catherine said something quietly to Camilla that made Camilla pause before responding. Nobody within earshot has repeated what was said, whether out of loyalty, discretion, or genuine uncertainty about what they heard. The content of that exchange has not surfaced. What has been described is Camilla's response. She looked at Catherine for a moment, then she nodded once slowly and said something brief in return, and then the group moved on. Whatever passed between them in those few seconds, it was not hostile. Several people who observed the exchange from a short distance described it as something closer to acknowledgement. Two women who understand each other's position inside this institution more clearly than almost anyone else alive, exchanging something that did not require an audience. What exactly that something was, only the two of them know. 3 days after the ceremony, Catherine appeared in public for the first time since Windsor. She was visiting a children's hospital in London. Routine engagement, the kind she has carried out hundreds of times over 15 years as a working royal. But nothing about it felt routine. The crowds outside the hospital were 3 times the size of what the palace had anticipated. People had come specifically because of what had happened at Windsor, because they wanted to see her, because something had shifted in how the public perceived her, and they wanted to be physically present in that shift. She wore no crown, no ceremonial dress, just her usual composed elegance, a warm coat, her hair down, the approachable presentation she has always favored for engagements involving children. She walked toward the crowd, and the noise that came back at her was significant. Catherine has always been popular. That is not new information, but popularity and authority are different things. You can be beloved without being powerful. The royal family has contained plenty of examples of both over the years. Diana was the most beloved royal of her generation, and the institution ultimately could not contain her, partly because her popularity was never converted into formal authority before everything collapsed. Catherine has spent 15 years doing something Diana did not have the time or the institutional support to do. She has built both simultaneously. The public affection came early and has never really wavered, but the authority has been assembled slowly, carefully, through consistent work, through the Royal Foundation, through her early childhood initiative, through the way she has conducted herself at every official engagement without generating a single significant controversy in a decade and a half of intense public scrutiny. That combination, deep public affection, plus accumulated institutional credibility, is what made the ceremony at Windsor possible, and it is what makes her position now genuinely different from anyone who has held it before. The crown changes things in ways that are difficult to articulate but immediately felt by everyone inside the institution. It is not just symbolic. Symbols inside the monarchy carry operational weight. They determine who gets deferred to in a room, whose opinion is sought first in a meeting, whose presence at an event signals the palace's formal endorsement of whatever that event represents. Catherine now carries that weight in a way she did not carry it the week before Windsor. Senior courtiers who have served multiple monarchs describe a visible shift in how she is being treated inside palace structures. Not dramatically different, not a sudden transformation in how meetings are run or decisions are made, but a consistent small recalibration in every interaction that adds up to something significant over time. She is being treated as the future queen, not eventually. Now, her relationship with William has also entered a new phase. They have always been described by people close to them as genuine partners. Not the performative partnership of two people playing complementary public roles, but an actual working relationship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. What the ceremony added to that partnership was formal symmetry. William has been accumulating authority inside the palace for 2 years, taking on briefings, making decisions, managing the Andrew crisis, reshaping the Duchy of Cornwall. He has been operating in practice as something closer to a co-regent than a Prince of Wales. Catherine was doing equivalent work. Her early childhood initiative had grown into a serious policy platform with genuine government engagement. Her public role had expanded steadily through her recovery and return. But there was always a slight asymmetry. His formal authority was growing faster than hers. The Crown at Windsor corrected that. They are now, in the eyes of the institution and the public, fully equal in their forward-facing authority. Two people pointed in the same direction with the same symbolic weight behind them. That is a formidable position to occupy. What this means for the monarchy's immediate future is something palace insiders are already mapping carefully. Catherine's first major solo engagement since Windsor is being planned with a level of ceremonial attention previously reserved for the monarch. Not because the palace is overstating her current role, she is still Princess of Wales, not Queen, and that distinction remains constitutionally important, but because the institution understands that public perception has moved and that the engagements she carries out now will be received differently than they were a month ago. She is also, according to sources, taking a more active role in decisions that previously would have gone through Charles's office first, not usurping anything, not overstepping, but being consulted earlier and more consistently on matters that touch the monarchy's public image and long-term direction. William is encouraging it. Charles is permitting it. The infrastructure of the next reign is being built in real time. There is one more thing worth saying about Catherine and what this moment means for her personally. She has been seriously ill. She faced a cancer diagnosis, underwent treatment, stepped back from public life, and then returned. That experience changes people. It changes what they prioritize, what they are willing to carry, and what they understand about the fragility of the time they have. She has spoken carefully about how the illness reshaped her perspective, about focusing on what genuinely matters, about being present for her children and for the work she believes in. The crown placed on her head at Windsor is not something she sought. People close to her are consistent on that point. She did not maneuver for this. She did not position herself against Camilla or engineer the conditions that made the ceremony necessary. She simply kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept being the person the public and the institution could rely on, and the crown found her. That is the story of this monarchy right now, underneath all the ceremony and the legal battles and the power shifts and the quiet palace conflicts. It is a story about who keeps showing up. Anne kept showing up for 50 years and secured her place at Sandringham legally because her record made it impossible to deny her. Catherine kept showing up through illness and scrutiny and 15 years of relentless public attention and received the most visible symbol of future authority the monarchy had to offer. And Camilla, who also kept showing up, who also endured more than most people could sustain, discovered that showing up is necessary but not always sufficient. The crown goes where the institution needs it to go. Right now, it is on Catherine's head, and everything inside that palace is being arranged around that fact. A crown lifted, a crown placed, 3 minutes that rewrote the next chapter of the British monarchy. Camilla did not break publicly. She never does. But something shifted in that room at Windsor that cannot be unshifted. Catherine stepped forward, and the institution stepped with her. That is not a small thing. That is the monarchy making its clearest statement in a generation about where it is going and who it is going there with. The question now is what Camilla does next, whether she finds a way to remain relevant inside a structure that has just formally moved past her, and whether the dignity she showed at Windsor is enough to write the final chapter of her story on her own terms.